Morning. Does anybody have any questions first about the assignment due tomorrow? You can do the subject worksheet. I'm just looking for a sense of what you're going to discuss in the paper and preliminary thesis statement, what you think you're going to say, and your basic research question. Also that you have an overview of where you're going to look for the sources that you get. Don't forget the librarian's still available to chat right now. He is a great source of information, or whoever you talk to up there. I think everybody's here for now. So yesterday we talked about the purpose of academic argument. And it's more about knowledge than it is about war. It's about gaining knowledge, about thinking about your world. So with that in mind, we're generally trying to persuade people. So there are 3 valuable appeals they talk about in your book that we're going to go over today. And those are logos, ethos, and pathos. Okay, so what is logos? What do you appeal to if you're using the logos appeal? Logic, right? So what kinds of information then would you put in your paper to appeal to someone's logic? Yes, data, statistics, studies, expert opinions, all of the things that have been well thought out and tested. Okay, those kinds of things have hard evidence, empirical evidence that's backed up by research. Okay, so what is pathos appeal? What are you appealing to if you're using the pathos appeal? If logos appeals to logic, then pathos appeals to emotion. Thanks, Robert. So, and there are fair and unfair emotional appeals. I think the best ones, of course, are fair emotional appeals, where that's basically you use things like stories and arguments that appeal to people's emotions, but the best of us, basically. So our concern for our fellow man, our desire to help other people, the sense of fairness about something. Okay. You will see unfair emotional appeals. Those tend to be manipulative. I would avoid those because they'll hurt the next thing you're talking about, which is your ethos, which is how much we trust you. So that's when you try to appeal to the worst in people, hatred, prejudice, anger, violence. When you try to scare people into agreeing with you as opposed to using fairness or logic. So I would recommend avoiding those because then people feel manipulated if they realize that you're using something on them. But they do tend to be wildly popular appeals because they work. You know, if you can scare people into voting for your candidate, people will scare you into doing it. But it's good to recognize when people are doing that. That's another one of those, you know, logical fallacies. If it just scares you and you look and break down the logic of what they're saying, is it true? Sadness rather than hate. I don't know. What do you guys think? I don't know. Sadness can sometimes be used. I think you can use it both ways, don't you? If, for example, if you're using stories of people who died of coronavirus to appeal to people to stay home, which I think I've seen them do, you're appealing to someone else's grief. You know, you're using that. Yes. Yeah. Some of those pet commercials, they are effective, but don't you feel a little manipulated by them? Yeah. Yeah, that's one of those things that I think you could make a good controversial paper about. Hey, I'm sure that they raise a lot of money, but at the same time, I can't watch them because they're too much. What do you guys think? Fair or unfair emotional appeal? The abused pet commercials. Do you feel manipulated? I gotta do some research about those. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure how effective they are because, like, yeah, I don't watch them, therefore I'm not sure that I donate. I think they could do the same thing with a fair emotional appeal, you know, without the horrible song and, you know, the sad pet eyes. Yeah, yeah, I would agree. I just think there are better ways that you can do it, and people who are on your side. I mean, the best thing to do is respect your audience, right? Respect their feelings and their ability to, you know, apply logic. I always give my audience the benefit of the doubt and try to treat them fairly, which helps with the next thing we're going to talk about, which is the ethos appeal. So if you're using the ethos appeal, how are you appealing to an audience? With what are you appealing to them? Credit? Yeah, can you explain more? Everyone who argues personal experience, especially if you have expertise with the issue, right? Everyone who argues has a persona, right? Yeah, you're basically proving your bona fides, right? You are establishing your expertise, kind of like you guys did with the process paper. For those of you who used your personal experience about what you were explaining to us, to show that you had experience with it, and then we're like, oh, okay, this person's done this before. I am more willing to listen to them tell me how to do something right that they've done before. So it's basically your trustworthiness. Are you trustworthy? Can we believe what you're saying? Or are you trying to manipulate us, right? Or scare us, or use a logical fallacy because you think we don't know what it is, or because you don't know what it is, right? Either one of those things is not good for your ethos. Either if we know you're using faulty logic to try to fool us, or you don't know you're using faulty logic, right? So it's your reputation. It's how reasonable you sound. The quality of your information. You know, I'm going to trust you if I think you've done more research into it versus just, kind of slapping it together. The quality of your writing and its correctness. It may not always be fair, but we do tend to judge people on how they present their arguments, right? So I want to show you guys a video that kind of has some more examples of this. 1 second here. So he's going to talk about these rhetorical devices and give you guys some examples of this. Okay. And he's also going to talk about another logical fallacy. Let me turn this up a little.
Which you can use to strengthen your arguments. This is mostly in relation to a high school paper, some sort of persuasive piece, or perhaps a speech that you're going to give. I'm going to talk about 3 rhetorical devices that are very useful. One logical fallacy that pops up all the time, especially in student papers, which you should try and avoid. And we're going to do this by looking at several commercials. The commercials I pulled off YouTube. I'm hoping I'm not stepping on any copyright rules. This is all for the purpose of education, not endorsing anything that's in the videos. So hopefully that'll clear anything up. So let's get started. Does anyone know who that guy is? He is one of the most famous orators of all time. And his name was Cicero. And he wrote, "How incredible it is that few men, using the abilities given to most men, have the power to interest, motivate, and persuade their fellow men." So let's talk about these devices. We're going to explore 3 rhetorical devices which you should use, and one logical fallacy that you should not use. So you should use the appeal to character. This is sometimes called ethos. The appeal to emotion. This is called pathos or pathos. And the appeal to reason. This is called logos. And you should not use a very common fallacy, the appeal to popular belief, argumentum ad populum. This pops up all the time in our culture, and we're going to look at some examples of it. So to start, let's watch this video, and I want you to think about what rhetorical strategies are being used.
I'm Dale Peterson, and I'm after the Republican nomination for Alabama Agriculture Commissioner. I've been a farmer, a businessman, a cop, a Marine during Vietnam. So listen up. Alabama Ag Commissioner is one of the most powerful positions in Alabama, responsible for $5 billion. Bet you didn't know that. You know why? Thugs and criminals. If they keep you in the dark, they do whatever they want with all that money. And they don't give a rip about Alabama. Here we are, losing 3 family farms a day. Illegals bust in by the thousands, and Alabama's unemployment's at an all-time high. And what are my opponents doing about it? Stealing yard signs in the dark of night from my supporters. Norman Grace brags on his Facebook page about receiving contributions from industries he would regulate. Bragging about receiving illegal money on Facebook. Who on earth would support such a dummy? And why? We're Republicans. We should be better than them. I'm Dale Peterson. I'll name names and take no prisoners. Give me the Republican nomination for Ag Commission, and let's show Alabama we mean business.
So let's talk about what you saw. I'm not really sure what ag commissioner is, but in this video, Mr. Peterson actually uses quite a lot of rhetorical devices. So though it seems like a very sort of homemade type of video, he's a pretty clever fellow in what he was able to do there. So personal character or ethos. So what does he talk about? He establishes a connection with his audience by referencing his work and occupations, which are honorable occupations. Being a farmer, a businessman, a cop, a Marine during Vietnam. So what he's trying to do there is build trust with the viewer by establishing that he is someone who can be trusted. And that's what ethos is. And there's one other prominent one, the appeal to emotion, pathos. He tries to access the fear he believes exists in voters. He appeals to their emotions, saying, here we are losing 3 family farms a day, while illegals are busted by the thousands and Alabama's unemployment is at an all-time high. So pathos in this example is, say, anger or fear. And that's a very common use of pathos because fear and anger are very motivating. So if you can tap into people's, whether it's anger or fear or whatever negative emotion, you can often persuade them using that. Anything else? There was actually a lot of things in that video, but these are the 2 main ones. Okay, we're going to look at one more video. And I want you to look at how the appeal to character, ethos, and the appeal to emotion, pathos, are used. As you watch this next video, think about how these rhetorical devices are being used differently than before.
1931 was not exactly a great year to start a business, but that's when Allstate opened its doors. And through the 12 recessions since, they've noticed that after the fears subside, a funny thing happens. People start enjoying the small things in life. A home-cooked meal. Time with loved ones. Appreciating the things we do have, the things we can count on. It's back to basics. And the basics are good. Protect them. Put them in good hands.
Okay, so another clever commercial. What did you see? You saw the appeal to character, ethos. Allstate suggests that their longevity is representative of their good character. They mentioned that they opened during the Depression and they survived 12 recessions since then. So clearly they must have a good character to be able to survive that sort of adversity. What else? The appeal to emotion. This is slightly different than before. Unlike the previous example, Allstate appeals to hope, that is positive emotions. They talk about enjoying the small things in life and getting back to basics and protecting your family with them. So in this case, they're appealing to hope and love, which are the other aspect of pathos. So it's not always a negative emotion you're appealing to. Sometimes it can be a positive, but ultimately it's the same rhetorical device. It's the appeal to emotion or pathos. So far, so good?
Okay.
Okay, what about the appeal to reason, which is logos? The appeal to reason is just that. It's an appeal to whatever makes the most sense. This is a very useful rhetorical device. When speakers, writers can neither establish credibility through their personal character nor manipulate the emotions of their audience or their readers, they can always advance their argument by explaining why their position makes the most sense. So let's look at an example of that. As you watch this video, think about how an appeal to reason is being used.
Every year, Provo subjects its cars to a race of doom, providing us with insight to help make our cars safer for you.
Okay, what did you see? Volvo appeals to reason. Every year, Volvo subjects its cars to a race of doom, providing us with insight to make our cars safer. What does that mean? If Volvo spends so much time collecting data on how cars are affected in crashes, then it stands to reason that they're better able to engineer their cars for safety. Right? So it's a direct causation. So they're not really using emotion, which is pathos. They're not using character, which is ethos. They're simply using logos. We spend a lot of time researching, therefore we're able to develop good cars. Sounds reasonable to me. What do you think? And lastly, argumentum ad populum, the appeal to popular belief. This pops up in our culture all the time, so much so that we use it quite often without even realizing it. So in this logical fallacy, the speaker-writer suggests that an idea is a good one simply because a large group of people believe that it is. And they don't base that on any sort of information. It's simply everybody else thinks it's a good idea, therefore it must be a good idea. So let's look at this video. It's sort of a tongue-in-cheek video, but let's watch it and see if we can figure out how the appeal to popular belief is being used.
Another billionaire is broke. C. Montgomery Burns has lost his entire fortune, estimated at $3 billion.
Sorry, Coke.
So what did you see? And yeah, sorry, Coke, if I'm stepping on your copyright. But Coke is a great company, and The Simpsons is a great TV show. So, but what was going on there? First of all, Mr. Burns loses his fortune. He's unhappy. What makes him happy and why? I'm sure you can answer that. Everybody's drinking Coke, makes them feel better. Coke doesn't say anything about why their product is particularly good or that it's healthy or give any kind of reasons. It simply shows that everybody is having a good time when they're drinking Coke. So the thought is that you can have a good time if you drink Coke also. So that's argumentum ad populum. Everybody else is doing it, therefore it's a good idea. It's technically a logical fallacy, but it pops up. You'll see this in commercials all the time. So it's something to avoid in your arguments. If you can, at least if you're going to use it, at least be aware that you're using it.
Don't use it.
So let's end with a parting thought. Whoever does not study rhetoric will be a victim of it. That's an ancient Greek wall inscription. Rhetoric is pervasive in our culture. It's all over the place. It's fine. You should use it yourself, but you should at least understand it so that no one can use it against you. So I hope that this was helpful for you. Persuasion is one of the most difficult things there is to do out there, but if you put an eye towards the classical approaches, ethos, pathos, logos, you will often do well. So thanks a lot.
Okay. So you can kind of see how advertising is a great place to see how they're using the appeals because they're sort of the boiled down version. They've only got a few minutes to get your attention. So they really concentrate what they're doing into one of the appeals to you. So ideally, the best academic papers have a balance of all of the appeals. Okay, you don't want it to just be about logic. You definitely don't want it to be just about emotion because then you don't have any research to back you up, right? But you also have to pay attention to how you come across and your credibility as the author, right? That you look knowledgeable. Okay. Authoritative, trustworthy, reasonable. Have you ever turned off the TV when someone was making an argument or ignored their argument? If so, why? Have you ever avoided anyone's argument? Yeah, tell me more what you mean about opinionated. Like, how are they coming across? You guys can help her out. Yes, if it doesn't look like they have logic to back up what they're saying, right? If they're not appealing to the audience that they're talking to, a lot of arguments you'll see are not directed at persuading people, but talking to people who already agree with them and sort of riling them up, right? And if you're not their target audience, then their argument's likely to turn you off because it doesn't have any backup or basis to it. Anything else that you find off-putting about someone who's trying to persuade you? It makes you avoid their argument? That's an excellent one, though. No backup. Too aggressive. That's a big one that I see a lot these days. When they're not listening, right? They're trying to force people. Exactly. No one likes to be forced into an opinion without logic or evidence. They're like their sheer will can overwhelm you. That's not an argument, right? That's more like bullying. So you don't want to come across that way in your paper either, where anybody who disagrees with me is stupid. Then we're getting into that logical fallacy we talked about, ad hominem. What's ad hominem? Attacking who? You're basically attacking the person or their character instead of dealing with the merits of their argument, okay? That should be a red flag right there. Why wouldn't you use logical arguments to counter what they're saying or offer them more information? If you start calling them names or trying to provoke the other side into something that degenerates into name calling, that's really not about persuasion, it's just about fighting a war. Okay? So your goal in this paper is to actually persuade your audience. So you can't be trying to force them into a belief. You have to coax them. You have to provide them logical evidence. You have to show them you're knowledgeable and reasonable. So one of the things that you guys are going to do in this paper is deal with the opposition. So there are going to be, since it's a controversy, we talked about the definition of a controversy, right? A controversy means there are reasonable opinions on both sides. So your opposition is going to have some reasonable points that need to be addressed, okay? If you ignore them, people are going to be like, you don't have a good answer for those arguments against you, or you don't know this argument against you, and neither of those is going to help your ethos. It's not going to help your appeal as an author if we think you're uninformed, or if you just don't have a good response, okay? So one of the things you're going to do that we're going to talk about is dealing with the other side. And there are two things you can do when you deal with the opposition. You can acknowledge that they have a point. Now, this would seem like it may not be a good idea, right? To say, hey, the other side has a point. That would seem to weaken your argument. It actually does not. It actually helps your ethos because you appear reasonable, right? Because we've already discussed if it's a controversy, there are legit concerns on the other side. So you can say, they have a point, but I have these 3 other points on my side. Because nothing is, seatbelts versus not wearing seatbelts, for example. There are, individual liberties on one side. There are, legitimate safety concerns on the other side. It doesn't mean that one side, doesn't have a point. You can just say the safety, in my opinion, in my view, and from what I'm showing you here, outweighs somebody's individual right to choose whether or not they wear a seatbelt or a motorcycle helmet or something like that. Or you can flip it and do the other side of that argument, but then you have to present logical arguments that show that the individual liberties are more important. So you can come at it from either side, but it is okay. One thing you should be aware of, like if you're looking at a product, has anybody ever like gone on Amazon to buy something? If every single review is a 5-star review, that should make you suspicious. Why? Why would you be suspicious of an argument or of a product or a service with no negative reviews? Can you think of why you might be? It suggests, right, that there might be paying. It seems fake. Why does it seem fake? Why would you expect that no matter how great, and there are lots of great products and services, right? Why would you expect that no matter how great the product is, that there are going to be some negative reviews? Yes, it's true. You can never make everyone happy, okay? Some products that work for one person's need, somebody else might have a different need, right? Nothing is perfect. Good point, Brandon. Sometimes it arrives damaged, right? Maybe through no fault of the company, maybe through an accident. People make mistakes, companies make mistakes too, that perfection. So it's the same thing when you're arguing. We are okay if you're like, hey, you know what? I'm reasonable. I think you have a good point. And we're like, oh, wow, they're actually willing to listen to someone's opinion. They're willing to take on opposing evidence. That makes us respect the opinions that you have developed even more, right? Because we see that you actually consider everything that's out there. Okay? Yeah, so be wary if you're like looking at all 5-star reviews for a product and no one's complained about anything and people complain about crazy things, I didn't think this book was a science fiction and I hate science fiction. Well, that's not a really legitimate review of the book, right? You just didn't read carefully before you bought it. Yeah, so you can't please everyone. So be suspicious if it's all good and no bad. And we should be suspicious of you as an arguer if you cannot acknowledge that there might be things that are against your argument. But then you'll have a response to it. So, like I said, you have this one point, but these 3 outweigh it, right? You're right about individual liberties, but the safety arguments really outweigh it. And, we should be willing to sacrifice some individual liberties in order to protect people. Okay? Or you can always refute it. That's the other thing. So there are the 2 responses that you can have to the other side that you will need to put in your paper, right? So you can say you are wrong, respectfully, with a reasonable tone, so you don't hurt your ethos. And here's why. So maybe they're basing it on old evidence, or there have been new studies, or, there's some flaw in what they're saying that you can deal with. And you can point out the weakness in their argument, okay? So when you are doing your research for the paper, don't forget you also need to pick out sources that offer opposing viewpoints to the one that you're leaning toward, so that you can say, here's what the opposition thinks. I agree with them, in this case, but I still think we should have student loan forgiveness, even though some companies will suffer, the government can make right, offer some kind of justification for why you still hold your opinion, okay? Or they're wrong, some companies have cheated students, with the loans that they've given them, whatever it is that picks apart their argument, okay? So don't forget that you're going to acknowledge or refute the opposition. And you're going to balance all three appeals. You're going to appeal to emotions, and I hope you will use legitimate, fair emotional appeals. Definitely logic, that's built into a research paper already. And, your character. You're going to come across as reasonable and trustworthy, because you are, right? You're going to be reasonable and trustworthy. You're going to have well-researched what you're talking about, okay? So, like I said we talked about hasty generalizations. You're going to use stories or appeals to emotions, but you're not going to say like one story represents everybody in a group. You might have wider evidence that does that, like a study or a poll, right? Don't use hasty generalizations, but look for stories to connect this to your issue and appeal to emotions. Questions so far? Is this making sense? Everybody's good so far? So don't forget, you can chat with the librarian for tomorrow's assignment. That's about not telling me what specific sources you found, but like, I'm going to use the EBSCOhost database. I'm going to use ERIC if I'm doing an educational issue, because it's a database that specifically has just educational articles in it. I'm going to look at the census data on something. There's a specifically database that has statistics on it if you're looking for statistics. Those are the kinds of things you want to look at for the assignment. I just want to make sure everybody knows where they're going to look to get good quality sources, okay? So that's a lot of what this assignment is about, and that you know where you're going, that you're starting to focus in on something, okay? So we're about out of time. Tomorrow, we'll talk a little bit about how to address the opposition, but think about how to appeal to your audience using all three of these legitimate argument appeals. All right. Otherwise, if you have questions, email me right now. I'll be online for a while. Otherwise, I'll see you guys tomorrow.